Okay.
Look at my cute rabbit mug.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I've got two little poodles on me. So
Aw. You have dogs right there in the recording. I love it.
I'm a bit I understand your love of rabbits. I'm a big dog guy. But Noah, thank you so much for joining us. We've really wanted to have an American join the podcast and explain to us what's happening over there. And you're one of the biggest liberal bloggers in America. I'm a big fan of your writing and your tweets and a lot of your takes. So it's really good to have you here. As a marker of my excitement, I'm actually up at 4:30 a.m. in Australia time. And Pekka's here as well, expert in Russian disinformation. And look, our podcast is all about, I mean, it really does kind of have a kind of European perspective and Australian perspective where we're kind of like the smaller states in the Western Free World Alliance, Finland, Australia. Joseph Kraut normally joins us. He's from Austria, Germany. And it's sad for me because, I was the biggest supporter of America. I loved AUKUS, the Australian Alliance with America, but the past couple months have just been crazy. And I saw, Noah, you had a tweet like just today, basically retweeting someone who was saying things were so good just 3 months ago, 4 months ago. We had the envy of the world economy and stuff like that. Remember, The Economist had a front page 6 months ago saying it was basically America was the envy of the world economically. And it's like now, it's like a sort of suicide thing. Tell us, what do you think is happening? What is actually happening in terms of Trump, this kind of suicide pact that is going on? And you have a great blog where you're talking about the worst case scenarios. Tell us about the worst case scenarios, the firing of Jerome Powell, the potential for like hyperinflation, Erdogan style, crazy economics when it comes to the central bank. Tell us more about this.
Well, anyway, first I should say what's interesting is that Erdogan got away with it. Erdogan, he provoked a currency crisis.
Yeah.
And so that hurt Turkey and it slowed their growth substantially in the late 2010s. I think pretty much Turkish GDP flatlined. But then their rebound from the pandemic was very strong, despite inflation that sometimes reached 80%. It was about 40 to 80%, and yet their real economy rebounded very strongly from the pandemic, unusually strongly. And so Erdogan, for those who don't remember, had this crazy belief that lowering interest rates will reduce inflation. It's actually the opposite. He got it wrong. Yeah. But it didn't seem to hurt him much. And then after a couple years of 40 to 80% inflation, which wiped out a lot of Turkish savings, but it also wiped out a lot of Turkish debts as well. And so it sort of became this jubilee that wiped the slate clean. The real economy managed to grow, and then Erdogan got a central banker who was willing to actually raise interest rates, sort of recanted his earlier macroeconomic craziness, and got the country largely back on track. And so Erdogan has not actually done that badly considering how crazy he started. But then if you look at most countries that have that level of inflation, it doesn't go back down. And the real economy suffer, it goes from 40 to 80%, I mean, we just had 8% inflation, 9% inflation for a year or so. People flipped their shit in America. Yeah. Imagine if we had 80%, 10 times as high. People would absolutely lose their shit. I mean, it would be, the amount, it would just be, riots in the streets, anarchy. I don't even know. Right.
Matty Iglesias, he had a tweet today where he basically said, if Bernie Sanders was producing this amount of capital flight, there'd literally be an army coup. It's just crazy.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And so, so I think, anyway, but once you get to 40 to 80% inflation, it doesn't stop. You're going to 1,000%. You're going to have a run on the currency. That's called hyperinflation. And hyperinflation will really screw your economy because it's impossible to make plans to invest or, hire or do anything. Really, your paycheck, you don't even know how much your paycheck will buy, but between the time you get the paycheck and the time you go to the grocery store. You don't even know. And so it's just crazy. You don't know how much of a raise to ask for. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. There's just economic chaos. Price signals get utterly swamped and distorted. And basically, so hyperinflation is really bad. And if you look at how much of a GDP hit countries take, I would say you have a few countries that seem to do relatively well with just about a 20% hit to GDP. Well, then other countries, Venezuela had a 75% hit to GDP. So imagine that Americans would go back to the same standard of living they enjoyed in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Now, some people pine for the days of the 1940s, right? But
Yeah.
let me tell you, if you had to live in the houses and eat the food of like the 1940s, of like an average person, not like the rich people in those glossy ads that everyone, posts with all the like big houses and the barbecues. Those are ads about rich people, rich fantasy people. And then on TV, you had like rich fantasy people on TV with these big houses and these great jobs. Like, if people had to go back to that, and the poverty rate in America was 25%, even if you look at absolute poverty, not relative poverty, like the poverty rate, like a lot of people in America were just dirt poor after, in the immediate aftermath of World War II. We spent the next decades and decades eliminating that absolute poverty. And of course, people on the left will tell you we didn't eliminate poverty because they switched to a relative measure that measures inequality. But in terms of absolute poverty, we basically eliminated it, except for, a few homeless drug people on the street. They're still absolutely poor. But other than those types of people, we basically eliminated it. And we'd undo all of that with a Venezuela-style hyperinflation, or like Zimbabwe, I think 40% drop in living standards, even from a very low base. And so like that's astonishingly bad. And so that's the biggest catastrophe we could fear is hyperinflation.
This is worst case scenario. I can't believe we're even Zimbabwe and Venezuela as the worst case scenario is so scary. And it's like 4 months in.
That's right. It's 4 months in. We're already talking about Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Now, to be fair, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that it's more likely that Trump will pull back, that he won't be able to pressure the Fed into printing infinite money to fund infinite deficits, that, like saner heads will prevail, even if those saner heads are still not sane in the absolute sense. Yeah. I still think that's probably the median scenario. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. But I think that, the fact that hyperinflation is possible should scare us. We should be scared.
Yeah.
Can I ask, like, where is this idea of, where did Trump come up with this idea of tariffs being a good thing? And like, why? I think that's my question.
Well, so tariffs specifically come from American history. So when in the 1800s, America used tariffs a lot because we didn't have the state capacity to collect other kinds of taxes, and because income tax was actually constitutionally forbidden. We were not allowed to do income tax, and so I don't remember exactly why that was initially forbidden. But later we changed the Constitution to allow income tax. But when you can't do income tax and you don't have the state capacity to collect like consumption tax or something, what do you tax? Like, you have to tax, you can tax ships at the port of entry. You can say, hey, you want to trade something here? Pay a fee. And you can do excise taxes on specific goods. So you had taxes on like whiskey or whatever. And so those are the taxes we used to fund the government. But because our government didn't do much stuff, there wasn't much to fund. And so we could get away with these taxes, even though these taxes are bad for the economy, we could get away with them. Also, trade was not it was somewhat of a big deal, but it wasn't as big a deal because you had mostly like wooden ships and like, these little wooden ships and like dudes throwing like bales of stuff onto a wooden ship. Like, that was your trade. Obviously, internal trade is going to be much bigger than like external trade for a country like America. So we could get away with those tariffs. But as soon as we allowed income tax, and as soon as we started having the government do more things where we needed to fund it more, we realized tariffs weren't going to get the job done. So we basically just replaced tariffs with income tax. And yeah, there had been protectionist. The main motivation for tariffs was not protectionism, although the protectionists loved the tariffs. Hamilton loved the tariffs for protectionist reasons. Most of the people who were into tariffs wanted to do it to raise government revenue. And so once you no longer needed tariffs to raise government revenue, and once it became apparent that they were a bad way to raise government revenue, we shifted away from them. And we had one more brief sort of protectionist spasm in the 1920s, really in the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, right at the end of 29. And those were done for protectionist reasons, because suddenly the economy was going wrong and people were sort of spasming and reaching, groping around for all kinds of possible other ideas of what they could do to revive this stagnant economy. And they didn't have They didn't understand Keynesianism or other things. They were just like, what can we do? Well, maybe it's the foreigners taking our money. Let's tariff them. And let's go back to these kind of tariffs that we had in the 19th century, just a few decades earlier. Right. And so they went back to that. But so tariffs are this sort of time-honored idea in America, whereas other countries, when they were in their sort of rapid growth phases, didn't, by then tariffs had mostly gone out. So China doesn't instinctively grope for tariffs, or Korea doesn't instinctively grope for tariffs, but America instinctively gropes for tariffs because that in our protectionist, early phase, that's what we used, right? And so the reason Trump, so that's half the question, I think, and the other half is just that Trump really hates trade deficits, and he thinks that like trade deficits and are the cause of deindustrialization, and that if we put tariffs, if we just get rid of the imports, America will magically reindustrialize. Factories will sprout up from the plain like mushrooms after the rain. That's sort of this idea.
It's a really idiosyncratic thing that Trump has, because like which economist even argues for this? It's like just Navarro, basically, it seems.
Just
like
Navarro,
yeah. He's found like the one economist,
right?
And
that's right.
Yeah, and I guess it's just like his own personal idiosyncrasies. Like he sort of like came up with this stuff in the 70s, 80s. It's like the one thing that he's kind of held to the entire time.
Right. That's right.
You were
and
talking.
It's sorry, just
no, you go.
When I mentioned one thing, is it almost seems like he wants all of the supply chains to move back to or come to America, even though probably they never were there. But like everything should be produced in America. Is this like it seems like the most like I cannot believe that he believes this. Like, can this be real? Like, this is my first question. Like, how does he think? Like, all these ads about coal mining coming back to the America, clean coal and so on, putting out these ads. We're looking for miners and so on, and kind of believing that the supply chains would actually and manufacturing would come back to the United States. But it's not realistic, is it? Like complete decoupling from China and other countries.
We could substantially reindustrialize America, but the policies that would accomplish that are not the policies that Trump is now doing.
Yeah, it's really amazingly counterproductive, and I think you've written about that, Noah. Like these policies are actually like having the effect of deindustrializing America further.
That's right. That's
Could
exactly
you
right.
go into that a bit further for us? Because that's an interesting idea.
So basically, the first, let me say that the Trump idea is that imports substitute for domestic production, and that if you get rid of imports, domestic production will simply come in and satisfy the demand. It's this implicit mental model of inelastic demand, so that and then domestic production versus international production. This idea was popular in Latin America and Africa in the 1960s and 70s, and it was called import substitution. It's the idea that if we just block imports, we will industrialize. It did not work.
Yeah, just nowhere, sadly.
Maybe it will work this time.
Maybe it'll work this time. But what actually worked, and we can get to this later, what actually worked was export promotion, and that's what the Asian economies figured out. But okay, so back to why did tariffs hurt domestic American manufacturing? The first reason is because it means that we can't specialize. So when you do manufacturing, usually you have a supply chain. Like one company will make the chips and the other company will do the assembly and another company will make like the plastic parts, and you have a supply chain, right? If you do, and then even before that, you have to mine the materials, refine the materials, and blah, 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 blah. So there's like a huge string of things. And if there's this famous video of Milton Friedman holding a pencil and telling you where all the stuff in that pencil comes from. Well, an iPhone is infinitely more complex than a pencil. And so the supply chain is much more complex. So when you put tariffs on stuff, when you put tariffs on like everything, so you could do targeted tariffs. So the Biden administration did targeted tariffs on like EVs and stuff from China, or whatever. It was fine. Nobody cared. Didn't matter at all. When you do tariffs on like everything, on like a whole ton of things, and when you do it on every country, right, then basically manufacturers have nowhere outside of the country to get cheap stuff, which means everything has to be produced in America. So if you have to cut down your wood in America, You have to mine your metals all in America. You have to refine your metals all in America. You have to basically make the chemicals all in America. You have to do the final assembly, which is really just shit work. It's just slapping stuff together again and again all day. You have to do that in America. And you have to do, like clothing, you have to like sew in America. Hence the memes of like, Chamath sewing underwear, back then.
Chamath.
Yeah. And so you have to do all that shit work. And because of that, you get pushed down the value chain because we only have a certain number of workers in America, right? And now we've got to pull some of them off of high value activities like making, high end like computer chips or designing things or doing like, research or whatever. We've got to pull some people off those high value activities and stick them onto low value activities like mining tin. Okay. And so that loss of specialization is one big reason why tariffs hurt domestic manufacturing. Now, I agree that depending on China for supply chains is probably not a wise idea, but depending on Mexico and Canada was completely safe a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there's no way that China will disrupt that trade in a war. And those were our allies. And we just decided to fuck them. We just decided to cut off trade with them because Trump's an idiot. And so that shows you how blanket tariffs on all products from all countries or close to it really screw you in a way that targeted tariffs on specific products will not. And so that's an important thing to realize. Now, so that's the first way. Another thing is that tariffs tend to hurt exports. First of all, because they make it more expensive for our export industries to produce. They make our export industries less competitive. So there are Honda factories in like Tennessee, Alabama, wherever, Honda factories that are making Honda's cars in America to export to Europe, to export to Brazil, whatever, right? They're making these, they're using America as an export platform. This is how China did manufacturing.
Yeah.
Like that's how China got rich. They had foreign companies come in, do their manufacturing in China. Well, we do the same thing in America. Honda produces cars in America to export, right? But if, and of course, GM exports cars from America. Ford exports cars from America. But if they can't get those components because the components got tariffed, right? Then GM and Ford and all those people will move their export production out of the country. And Honda will move their production out of America because they'll move it to some country where they can source their goddamn components and materials. They'll move it to a place where they can source the stuff. And then they'll still be exporting to Europe and Brazil. They'll just be doing it from another country. And there go the American jobs. Okay. And what that also means is that domestic manufacturers can't get scale because they can't, they become uncompetitive in export markets. So they lose out on the world market and they only have the little American market that they can play in. That means they can't get the scale to be efficient. Scale matters a lot in manufacturing. So if you look at like BYD, it has a factory bigger than San Francisco, I think. And so that's the kind of scale you need to be competitive. But then American factories that are unable to sell overseas because they can't source cheap components, those factories will not be able to scale, and they will not have scale, and they will their costs will go up, will make us even more uncompetitive. And so there'll be sort of the spiral multiplier effect, you call it. And so then basically that sucks, and our manufacturers will get their ass kicked. The third reason that it could hurt our manufacturing is because when manufactured goods get more expensive, people shift their consumption habits towards services. Instead of buying new stuff, they'll just consume experiences instead.
Mm-hmm.
They'll go glamping or something. And that means that will deindustrialize us as well, because then Americans just aren't buying as much manufactured stuff from our own companies or anybody. And so the fourth thing is a possible recession. If this stuff kicks us into a recession, that will just reduce aggregate demand. And so that could hurt manufacturing too. But that's a short-term thing. So the other three things, like loss of specialization, loss of scale, and consumer taste shifts, consumer substitution, those things are very long-term. And so that means that there's no sort of pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, right? There's no long-term gain for all this short-term pain that we're going to inflict on ourselves.
Yeah. Tell us about your second nightmare scenario, which is like a sovereign default where Trump literally just decides he's going to default on the entire debt. And
right.
Tell us what happens then.
Right. So that actually is nightmarish, but it's actually less nightmarish than hyperinflation. So on average, countries that default see their GDP drop by about 20% instead of by 40%. So
Oh my God.
it's actually less nightmarish. I'd rather have a 20% drop. I'd rather go back to the living standards of like, the like, 1990 than like 1945.
Oh my God, yeah.
Right. Or
No,
or, or
that's so scary.
1960 or something. Like but I don't want to do either one. And I think people who romanticize and nostalgify those former eras would find themselves pretty upset if they found themselves living that kind of lifestyle suddenly.
I mean, this is the question, right? What actually drives these fantasy beliefs for MAGA? Because I think you've written about both of this, like, or shared stuff about both of this. Like, part of it seems to be like actually an incel thing where like there are like guys who are really angry that women have more advances in sort of like economic, in their economic outcomes, and they therefore like actually want to sort of like crash the economy because they don't want women to see advances. Like this is some kind of like psychodrama that's playing out in their heads. And the other one was just like these like really outdated ideas of work, and like a real man is on a fucking factory line for some reason. Like instead of a real man being, I don't know, like an engineer who's drafting ideas for these, I don't know, space shuttles. Like instead you're like literally mining tin for some reason.
That's
Like,
right.
so what do you think are actually like the main like sort of like psychological drivers for these people? It's just strange.
I'm not an expert, and I think there's a number of things. I think that there's different classes of people. I think one thing is that if you go against the dear leader in the MAGA movement, you're out.
Yeah.
You're just kicked out of the club. And then where do you go? Will the Democrats take you? No.
Yeah.
One problem is the Democrats don't have a big enough tent. They're not accepting enough of defectors from MAGA land. And the Democrats have been focused on purity quite a lot. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I think even if the Democrats focus less on purity, I think that there's just a lot of these people are very conservative. They don't want to go to the Democrats. They don't want to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
They don't want to be Bruce Bartlett or whatever, right? They want to stay Republican. They just want to be a Republican who doesn't suck. But the point is that like when the music's playing, everyone's got to get up and dance. Like that's the only game in town. Like where do you go if MAGA kicks you out? And MAGA is such a cult. They require such dogmatic adherence to everything dear leader does that there's nowhere to go. And so I think they just sort of grumble behind the scenes and then shut up and play along.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what's the biggest thing that's going on.
Yeah.
That's a long-winded way of saying like discipline.
Yeah. The social media stuff is crazy. Like, as you said at the start of the podcast, people were so mad about like 7-8% inflation. And that was a huge reason why Trump probably won. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, you have all these MAGA influencers coming out saying, literally accept economic pain and sacrifice for the leader. It's really incredible. Like the type of personality cult that has risen is like genuine, like sort of like Maoist. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. It is dime store Maoism.
Yeah.
Actually, if you read a little bit about the history of Maoism was like 10 different things, and Mao would change his mind every week.
Yeah.
And then what Mao would do, but so Mao had a personality cult. You had to adhere to dear leader, but the way Mao stayed on top was by provoking massive fights among everyone else. So he'd elevate a guy that he said was great, and then purge that guy, and then basically he'd encourage the Red Guards, and then encourage the army to go after the Red Guards, and so he'd cause this dissension underneath him as a way of having him be like this compromised dictator who stayed on top because everyone else was fighting everyone else underneath him. He ruled by chaos,
which is Trump. Exactly. Yeah.
And so which is very different than say how Stalin or Xi Jinping rules, which is very different. Those guys rule through cronyism, right? Those guys don't get the guys underneath them to fight. They all suspect each other and distrust each other, sure, but they don't fight. They all adhere to like one strong dear leader. But Mao actually, China was too chaotic for that. Mao was not able to do that, and so Mao had constant rivals within the CCP, and he was constantly trying to get them to fight each other and just sort of surf the wave of their internal conflict. And so Trump's leadership style is, it's different than Stalin and Xi Jinping because he's not good at placing cronies everywhere, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe Putin. I don't. Putin
He
has
tries to.
Putin's a little different, but let's not go into that. But anyway, but it's also different than Mao because like Trump isn't. Trump has the similarity with Mao that he comes out with these like crazy pronouncements. Today we're going to do a new kind of economy. Everyone's going to make steel in your backyard this week. Mao wasn't thinking of that in like the 1930s, right?
Yeah.
He thought of that on the fly.
Yeah,
it didn't work. It killed a lot of people, and then he thought of something else, right? Which also didn't work and killed a lot of people. But then but Mao was just constantly thinking of new things and doing some crazy new thing. Trump also does that kind of thing. There's he shifts back and forth, and people are like, yes, art of the deal, whatever. But his rule is much more personality cultish, right? It's much more like Mao had the personality cult, but Trump doesn't have the rivals that Mao had. Like Vance and Musk, there's a lot. Musk has been sort of fighting with other people in the administration. That's true. But then I don't think, Musk isn't going to overthrow Trump and replace him, nor is Vance, I think. Although Trump certainly fears that they will, but I don't think they will. I think that Trump is the only likable guy in the whole MAGA movement. JD Vance scores extremely poorly on likability, and Musk maybe even worse. Everyone pretty much hates Musk now. His popularity tanked. People liked him back when he was just a nerd who just built stuff, but now everybody hates him because nerds don't have a very good track record of becoming populist politician. People that Musk doesn't understand your average like schmo. He understands your average coder, your average hardware engineer. He doesn't understand your average plumber. And so and JD Vance doesn't understand anyone.
Yeah.
He's just like an evil robot. People really hate JD.
How he comes across, hey. I think for Trump, because Trump has a bit of humor to him, like even though I hate the man, but like at least he can be funny sometimes. Whereas JD comes across really scary.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, he killed the Pope, so I mean, he
did
seems kind of evil. Yeah.
And he fumbled a trophy and killed the Pope. Yeah. Anyway, so but like what Trump does is basically Trump's rule is more fragile because he's a populist. He's ruling a fundamentally democratic system, but acting like an autocrat.
Yeah.
And wielding power in the way that an autocrat does. And I believe that there has to be a special confluence of factors present for him to be able to do this. Yeah. One is the lack of credible alternatives and rivals within the Republican Party. So no one else really connects. There's no obvious rivals. If Trump had real rivals within the Republican Party, populists who could connect, if there were a Reagan around today, who could be populist, but then could just like say, Trump's a retard, as Reagan said about many of his rivals, and not in those exact words. But if there were real populist rivals who could stir the passions of Americans and come across as real and relatable to your average American, then Trump might be in more trouble. So this lack of rivals, I think, has to do with it. I think the parlous state of the Democrats has to do with it. The fact that Democrats have refused to really make themselves a big tent party. Yeah. That Democrats have, Democrats have this internal conflict that no one sees, which is that all the staffers, all the 28-year-old staffers who take care of all the day-to-day functioning of the party, believe really strongly in Palestine and various other causes, Palestine and trans stuff and all the other stuff that most Americans don't believe in. Yeah. And that most of the older establishment Democrats don't really believe in. But then the young Democrats do believe in it. So there's this internal civil war between the sort of young, leftist staffers in the Democratic Party and the moderate older people who aren't able to do the day-to-day stuff of the party. So that's a big problem. The Democrats are extraordinarily weak. It's only because the Democrats are extraordinarily weak that Trump is able to sort of maintain the appearance of being this all-powerful autocrat. Remember that Trump got a slim plurality of the vote.
1.5%, yeah.
Yeah, 1.5%. It's not huge. He's not he started out this term more popular than he started out his first term. Yeah. But he's not that popular. He's not Trump is not he's a beloved figure to MAGA people, but he's not a beloved figure to your average person.
Yeah.
He's not Reagan, right? Reagan stomped. Reagan won like, I don't know, 48 states or something.
Yeah.
49 states. I don't remember. Reagan just like stomped all over the whole country twice. Like
they act like he won 48 states. That's
Mhm.
seriously, that's the one of the biggest problems for them, I think, like the hubris of it.
Yep. And basically Trump has drunk this Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Trump is actually an aging, he's going mentally downhill, not as fast as Biden, but he is going mentally downhill. And he is older than when Biden did his first term.
Yeah.
And so Trump is, has no real successor. He's at the end of his life, politically and just literally. And he had only a slim plurality of the vote, never that popular figure, always very divisive. And yeah, this is absolute hubris.
Yeah.
And he's taking this he's taking this slim plurality and he's using it to just break everything about America.
Yeah.
He's just smashing everything about America that he can, be it our alliance systems, transatlantic alliance, be it our economy, or be it our institutions, government norms, all this stuff. Trump is just taking a baseball bat and smashing America on his way out the door.
Yeah.
It's like they're wrecking the hotel room on their way out. That's what MAGA has become. It's just wrecking America on their way out.
Yeah. There's no building project at all. There's nothing
nothing's being built
at all.
No.
Yeah.
It's purely destructive.
But okay, so
yeah.
there's a lot of talk these days, especially coming from Bannon, that Trump will be elected again, and all this, like basically getting rid of a checks and balances system that the US has. Do you think it's possible to do this? Do you think it's possible to kind of destroy the democratic system of the United States?
Yes. Yeah. I think that we're not going to implement a functional, oligarchy in its place, but we can cause a lot of chaos and degradation. So I think the closest analogy, you have people like Erdogan, who have really just, or Netanyahu,
or Orban,
really just, pardon?
Or Orban in Hungary,
probably. Or Orban. I know less about Orban. I haven't read as much, but people say that.
Yeah.
But
there's also this guy in Russia. I think his name is Putin. He also, I think, he tried the same thing.
And I was going to say the model for all of these guys is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
It is not Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. It is not Stalin, Mao, Hitler, or any of these guys. It's Putin. His success, Putin's success at taking a chaotic, democratic system with distributed sort of power and centralizing it as this sort of like postmodern autocracy. That inspired people like Orban and probably Erdogan too. And probably Netanyahu too. Netanyahu is a big Putin fan.
Yeah.
And so I think that these are all Putinoids, and they've seen how Putin has managed to transform Russia into a very cohesive state. Nobody's really questioning the war. Nobody's really rebelling. All the oligarchs are on board with the war. Yeah. All the all the Siloviki are on board with the war, and there's nobody else really. Like all the military guys are on board with the war. There were like the only people who challenged his power were like a few warlords like Prigozhin and Strelkov, Gherkin, right?
Yeah,
that asshole. Yeah, and then like Putin just like he got rid of them. Yeah. Are there even any of those guys left out there? But so basically, Putin is the success story that these guys want to emulate. And of course, Trump idolizes Putin and would love to turn America into a sort of a Putinist state. And the question is, can they do it? I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows because America is not Russia. And I don't think Erdogan has managed to do nearly as much as Putin has. I don't think Turkey is not Russia. There's still power, I think, is much more distributed in Turkey. And Erdogan's continued, popularity rests on his performance a lot more than Putin does. Putin has really fucked Russia's economy, gotten them involved in this unwinnable war, things like that. But Erdogan has actually strengthened Turkey's hand internationally. He has made Turkey great again internationally. He has, he has won most of his proxy wars. He has the Turkish economy, despite that rough patch for a few years after the currency crisis of 2018, has really, has done well, has continued to do well. It's continued to integrate with Europe. He fights with the courts and he fights with like other domestic institutions. Erdogan does, but he's fundamentally popular, and he's popular because he's done well by the economy and by Turkish power, right? He's delivering as a populist. Putin is not. Putin has not had to deliver. Putin delivered in the early part of his term, right? He made Russia great again for a little while. He beat up on Georgia, right? He crushed Chechnya. He beat up on Georgia. He took a little bit from Ukraine, and then in 2014. So like for the first decade and a half of his rule, he actually, GDP really strongly rebounded from the post-Soviet collapse. So he did deliver, but since then he's been able to keep his hold on power without delivering. But I'd say that's unusual. I don't think Trump will. Trump's really old. Like Putin took power when he was like 50s. Is that true? And then like Trump,
a lot younger than Trump, obviously. Yeah,
a lot younger than Trump. I don't remember how 55. I don't remember. I looked this up at some point. But then but Trump's 80, with no clear successor. I'd say that Vance is his Medvedev, right? He's like this guy who just screams a lot of like extremist shit, but doesn't really have much of a power base and the people don't really like. He's just there to like be the little attack dog. Yeah, and then like who else? Like Musk is just this industrialist that people don't really like. This sort of weird, ugly nerd that people don't like.
Putin had oligarchs too that he ultimately turned on and just like destroyed. And I think you've written about this as well, Noah. There was the idea that Elon was like a shadow president, but with the tariff stuff, like he's been fucked over pretty badly.
Yeah, that's right.
It's kind of unclear, like whether Elon even realizes that maybe his role is being used by Trump. Like Trump has tasked him with doing all this unpopular stuff, smashing the federal government and stuff like that. Now his popularity is in the shitter. And tariffs on Tesla stuff. His whole economic empire is threatened by what Trump's doing. He put all this pressure on Trump to stop the tariffs, and it wasn't able to do it.
Right. Elon is a smart guy. He's extremely good at building organizations. He's not a politics guy. He never has been. Other than Peter Thiel, when they worked together at PayPal, he's never had to deal with like a real rival for power.
Yeah, good point about Thiel. Yeah,
right. Peter Thiel, and I would argue that Thiel really ran PayPal and is just better at politics than Musk. Musk he's a builder and he's a nerd. He's great at ordering people around when he holds all the stock.
Yeah.
Right. He's great at fundraising and stuff like that, but he's fundamentally not a politicker.
Yeah.
Thiel's a venture capitalist. Thiel's a good politicker. I don't know how good he is, but he's better than Musk. And
he built JD Vance's career as well, Thiel.
He did.
As like a mini-me kind of thing.
Thiel has sponsored a lot of people. Musk hasn't done that to a single person. Musk is not a very good fixer. He's not a good kuromaku, as the Japanese would say, which means like someone who arranges politics from the shadows. Musk isn't good at that.
Oh yeah.
Thiel is good at that. And I don't know that Thiel's necessarily the best. There's a lot of other guys who are good at that too. And Thiel's one of many, but like Musk wants to be the front man because he's a fundraiser. But he's not a good front man. Like when he tried to influence this Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, it backfired tremendously, and everyone who heard about him just went out and voted for the other guy that he didn't like. So it's just Musk screwed himself, and he really that was Musk is not well liked by the general populace, and there's a lot more. Bernie Sanders has been making massive amounts of hay, getting Musk to getting people to rally against Musk, the Stop Oligarchy tour.
Yeah, true.
But he has people aren't, less willing to pour into the streets against Trump because they sit there and think, oh God, Trump's screwing us. But he doesn't inspire the same kind of hatred and vitriol that Musk does, actually.
Can we ask you, why do you think the street opposition to Trump is kind of muted compared to the first term?
Well, because the opposition, first of all, the opposition's been exhausted.
Yeah.
We've had Trump's been around since in a major figure in American politics since 2015, 10 years, right? Yeah. And he's still there and he's still doing stuff. It's like, oh God, we'll never get rid of it. He's just a fixture of American politics.
Yeah.
So I think that this Trumpism doesn't really go away until Trump himself dies of old age, which will happen.
And even then, do you think, I want to
go on, Drew.
Is there a risk, do you think, of like Peronism, like outliving Peron in Argentina, where it's like that's a worst case scenario. Imagine in 50 years you've got just like, this undead cult of Trumpism. That would be terrifying. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's a chance of that? Like outliving Trump somehow?
Maybe. I doubt it. I think it's ruinous. It's economically ruinous enough. So Peron did, Peronism did sort of economically ruin Argentina, but it wasn't the only thing that economically harmed Argentina.
Yeah.
Right. There was a lot of other stuff in there. I won't go into that, but Argentina had a lot of stuff wrong with it.
Yeah.
But there wasn't this like obvious thing that they could do to just like, just eliminate tariffs and then maybe stuff will go back to the way it was. I think Trump has permanently broken and will permanently break some stuff in the American economy such that eliminating tariffs won't just restore the world of 2019. But I think people will want to. They remember being rich. Industrial interests are big in America. There's like we have big business. We have a lot of business. We have a lot of people with a lot of economic stakes and stuff. I doubt that Trumpism will become this like zombie economic ideology that kills us forever, like, Peronism sort of did to Argentina. But I can't rule it out either. Like I don't understand these big historical, political, economic processes. I don't pretend to understand them. I think it's possible. And also how possible we think it is might affect how possible it is. Like if we think it's a big worry, then I think maybe that means people fight against it more strongly. So it's hard to say what happens here. I don't know, but sorry, what were we going to say?
I just wanted to ask, like, do you know what the MAGA base is expecting from Trump? And there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of rallying against immigration and so on. But like, what are they expecting from Trump, or do they even know what they expect from Trump?
Right. So I think that the thing that they want the most is so there's the base and then there's regular people. So I think that a lot of regular voters wanted Trump to bring down inflation. Yeah. That's what they wanted. But then I think that's the widest circle of Trump voters. Everyone was mad about inflation. Then you go in a bit and you look at just conservatives and Republicans, right? Those people wanted to stop immigration.
Yeah.
That's what those people want. They care about immigration the most. And then there's a smaller circle, a very hardcore sort of like, you could call them the new right, okay, within the broader circle of conservatives and Republicans. The Red Guards. Those people want to reimagine American society based on their idea of Western civilization and what Western civilization means, which is an idea that's inside. And I wrote this post, Understanding the New Right.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Thanks. And the Free Press, who's usually a pro-Trump outfit, they republished it.
Yeah. Tell us about that idea, like the new right. Yeah.
What right. So basically, the idea of what is Western civilization? Well, number one, it's people who are descended from Europeans.
Yeah.
We call them white people.
Yeah.
Number two, it's the heritage of Christianity. Whether or not there's the real Christianity of people going to church and whatever, it's the respect for Christian heritage. But number three, and this is by far the most important one, it's respect for those ideas as the organizing principles of our society. Yeah. So if you go to a place where like everybody's white and everybody's Christian, but they're a bunch of libs, the MAGA people, the new right hates that kind of area.
They hate it.
If you go to Burlington, Vermont, like everybody's white, like, and there's no like Muslims or whatever in Burlington, Vermont. There's probably no Jews. There's no like Buddhists. I don't know, but like, but people don't pay lip service to the idea that like everybody being white is a good thing, and that like heritage of Western civilization is a good thing. People don't pay lip service to the Christian heritage as being like one of the organizing principles of our society in Burlington, Vermont. So they don't like that. It's like or like Oberlin College. You go to Oberlin College, just a bunch of like white people who grew up Christian. But they don't want that. They want reverence for the idea. And this is why they are mad at Europe, because they feel like Europe is in some sense home base, their parent civilization. And they feel that Europe has abandoned its own heritage. Yeah. Europe has, by letting in the Muslim immigrants, the brown Muslim immigrants, and by, that's the main thing, is just letting in the brown Muslim immigrants. Also by like, accepting trans people, gay people, whatever, like all the other stuff, all the lefty stuff, but primarily because of Muslim immigration to Europe. They believe that Europe has fallen, and to fall, to believe that something has fallen, you have to have believed it was in this great state before. That's the reverence for Western civilization. The idea that Europe's past was great, and that America should be organized around the principle of paying homage to Europe's past, and that Europe needs to be reorganized along the principle of paying homage to Europe's past. That is the past of European greatness is the central organizing principle of the new right, which is a minority faction within the Republicans, who themselves are a minority a majority faction within, but not all, of the Trump voting coalition. So the hardcore of the hardcore cares about this idea of past European greatness as the organizing principle, I believe.
Yes.
That's why they love Russia, and that's why they hate Europe.
Yeah.
That's why they love Russia. They believe that Putin, more than anyone else, has upheld this idea. So Russia's not a very Christian country. Nobody goes to church, whatever, right? It's not very Christian. And yet, like, Patriarch Kirill goes and blesses Trump's war. So it doesn't have the actual Christianity, but it has the reverence for the idea of Christianity as an organizing institution. That's what they care about, not the actual going to church. And this differentiates Trumpists from the religious right of my childhood, because the religious right went to church. They wanted prayer in schools. They had something called See You at the Pole, where they'd go pray at the flagpole every morning. They lived Christianity. Trumpism wants to pay homage to the idea of historical Christianity as an organizing principle for our team, our civilization. That's what they want, not the real thing. And that's why they respect Russia, because you have Patriarch Kirill going blessing the war, right? Yeah. And so that's part of it. And then as for whiteness, okay, European descent. Well, okay, so Russia does ads about how Russia is a diverse country. We have a diverse military. They have the woke Russia military ad.
Yeah.
They've got Russia would prefer that the brown minorities fight on its front line, so they get killed more. So it's Russia's not that homogeneous a country. It's
where did they come up with that idea? That's the funny thing. Where did they come up with this idea of Russia? Because it's so different to the actual reality of Russia.
But what I'm saying is, I don't think the reality is what matters. The idea is the respect, the homage, the organizing principle, the lip service matters more than the real thing. Because we're in a world of onlineness and memes where lip service is all that is real to these people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The reason they don't care if anybody goes to church and they don't go to church themselves is because society is no longer organized around church. It's organized around fucking memes on Twitter. Our society got reorganized from in-person hangouts to social media. That's what society is now. That's where people spend their time. This is where you live. This is your church. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. And
and they just want to see their team. They just want to see their team doing clapbacks on Twitter. That's actually almost the height of everything.
Right. It's about dunking on people in the name of Western civilization. It's not about actually going to church. It's not even about having actual white people. JD Vance is married to an Indian woman. These people will absolutely hang out with Latinos, Black people who love the MAGA stuff and are willing to have a beer with them and whatever, talk about the same goddamn online memes, because it's not about the reality. It's about the lip service, because in a meme-driven social media organized society, lip service, where everyone lives online, lip service matters more than lived offline reality.
Absolutely.
That's my thesis.
No, I actually think that's a really good thesis of Trumpism and all these people. A really good example of what we were just talking about. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU head. She is Lutheran. She has I think she has 7 kids. She's been, happily married in the same marriage for 40, 50 years. She's literally lived her entire life as a Christian conservative. And all these people would absolutely fucking hate her and would literally prefer to spend time with Andrew Tate, who's a Muslim convert who's accused of all these heinous sex crimes. But exactly as you said, it's not even, that's the funny thing. It's not even about actual white people. It's not even about Christianity or anything. It's just who's on our team, who dunks on the libtards. Like it really is just this. Yeah, it's all simulacra. It's so postmodern.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you look at all the, I call it the Christian LARP, because it's not, it's live action role playing. Basically, they are not. When you look at all these, when you look what these people have done, like Trump, Elon Musk, what they have done in real life, it's not very Christian. Like
Elon's harem. Yeah.
Like all this stuff. There's not much. I wouldn't say that they are Christians. The same goes for Russia. Russia has been able to sell this idea of a traditionalist, conservative Russia. They started it over 10 years ago online, and they've been very good at it. But they are very secular, and also like all this talk about Muslims invading Europe. There's more Muslims in Russia than there are in Europe. So it's just a complete illusion that has been smoke and mirrors. It's been created by Russia, and they've been very good at it. And now I think MAGA has been using the same strategy for a while now.
What's interesting is that the society that most fulfills the actual reality of the stuff MAGA pays lip service to is Poland. It's much more conservative than the surrounding places, and it's much whiter than the surrounding places. And Christianity is much more valued, and people go to church in Poland. And like,
they trolled Sidorsky, the foreign minister.
Yeah. So Poland lives the reality of what conservatives would like, while Russia pays lip service to it. But in an extremely online, social media driven age, memes matter more than reality.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so does Ukraine. Ukraine is also a very, very religious country. There's a lot of Catholics. There's a lot of Orthodox Christians. So it's just like, as you said, we live in a meme-based reality now. So it's much easier to manipulate, narratives online than to kind of go out there and see the truth for yourself. The people do not do that. So we are kind of living on this lie through all these funny memes. It's a sad situation. I don't know, but also I think we just have to kind of admit that Russia has been extremely good at playing this system. They created the system, and they've been absolutely the best in creating these narratives. And we are always one step behind. We are always reacting. And now the United States has decided to fuck it. We're just gonna go with the same system, and let's try this autocracy thing. Let's see where it takes us.
Right. But go ahead.
No, sorry, you go. Sorry, you go.
No, Drew.
I was going to ask you, I mean, this comes into it, the online information ecosystem, right? Like, why do you think us traditional liberals sort of thing are just it feels like we get slaughtered online, right? Compared to all this insane slop, and so much of it is manufactured from Russia. And, you look at the podcasts in America, the top podcasts in America, like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, like why is this information ecosystem getting so bad?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that there's lots and lots of research about how a lot of these podcasts are spread through social media. The clips spread, and social media, especially Twitter, but a lot of public social media, routinely and consistently spreads the worst stuff, the most inflammatory stuff. It's the technology. We invented technology that fucked us. And in fact, this is going to be the subject of a post that I write soon, which is like, how did America go so wrong? Well, there's a number of ways. There's a number of reasons. But I think that technology, our society was uniquely vulnerable to the downsides of the technologies we created. Yeah. Social media was our Shoggoth, if you know that reference. Shoggoths were the sort of like robotic servants of these, I think they're robotic or somehow constructed servants of these like ancient elder race that ruled the earth before the Shoggoths rebelled and killed them all. And, like people always talk about AI as being a Shoggoth, as being this thing that'll rebel and kill us. But actually it was social media. Like that's what rebelled and killed America is social media. And I'm going to elaborate on this at length in a post about where America went wrong. But I think there's, one thing is that America, as a very diverse country, ideologically and in every other possible way, we benefited from having the ability to spread out geographically and sort geographically, and Twitter destroyed that. when it threw us all into one room and instantly killed our ability to spread out and not talk to each other. America survived on internal fragmentation, and then we had and Twitter internally centralized us in a way that our civilization was not prepared for.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. It's like, I mean, previously you could literally just silo yourself off if you didn't want to go talk to people.
You didn't want to live in a blue state with all these goddamn hippies. You moved to Texas. You can still move to Texas, but all the same people are still going to be right there online, which is where you actually live. This is your home, and you can't move away.
It makes me so angry. Yeah,
that's right. And whereas if you live in France, yes, there's social divisions in France, but like, the French language internet is relatively isolated from the English language internet, and then the country was always pretty centralized. Yeah, you go to the south of France, don't live in Paris. There's some geographical differences, but like pretty much all the French people are already sort of in the same room with each other. And then like to a much greater degree than America anyway. These aren't absolutes I'm talking in. And so America didn't have that, right? America survived in being, like right-wingers in rural Alabama were in a highly functional coalition with left-wingers in San Francisco. They worked together, they lived together because they weren't actually together. They obeyed the same laws and followed the same institutions and even watched the same TV shows. But there were important things they differed on that they didn't have to agree on. They could agree to disagree because they could spread out. And social media instantly killed that. It didn't kill it gradually over time. It killed it overnight. In just a couple of years. And we were not prepared to deal with that. We were not prepared to deal with taking this decades upon decades of sorting and throwing everyone all back together in one room.
Yeah.
We were uniquely vulnerable to that. So I don't think it was Russia that toppled our civilization. It was us. Yeah. It was the fact that we created a monster that devoured us. And that same monster is harmful to other countries. Social media like Twitter is toxic by its very nature, and it erodes other cultures, but it doesn't immediately clobber them, I think, the way it did us.
Wow. I mean, in this worldview, I mean in this account, it's like I guess social media is like sort of the printing press, and that's why America is able to, in relatively normal material conditions, like material conditions of actually economic growth and doing what, suddenly is able to just have this political catastrophe, like self-inflicted suicide almost.
Yeah.
It really is because this is the thing, right? Like 6 months ago, everything was normal. There was the Economist front cover saying like literally the envy of the world was the American economy. And then somehow in those conditions, like we're now talking about like Zimbabwe and like as the worst case scenario. It really is like stunning. I don't know what else. There's no other comparison for that, I don't think, in history. Like a world hegemon just like voluntarily just like shooting itself in both feet. I don't know, like what is there?
I have a question. I think for a long time, the United States has been the biggest superpower in the world. China is trying to catch up. And now it looks like it might. What does this mean? There's been a lot of talk about this like multipolar world, that the world will not be US centric anymore and so on. Will this become a reality now that Trump is kind of doing all this agent of chaos stuff?
Will what become a reality?
Do you think that the US #1 role as the biggest superpower in the world is going to be it's gone, and China will take over that #1 spot? I think that's the
yes and
question.
No. I wrote a blog post about that.
Yeah,
called
that was interesting.
The Chinese. Will this be a Chinese century? So the short answer is yes. I do believe that will happen now, but I don't think it will be just like take America out, slot China in for what America was before. I think the role America played in the world will not be played by most of it will not be played by China. China as hegemon, China will be the most powerful country in the world. It will be able to exert its will over other countries, and it often will do that. It will have the most economic power, the most military power, etc. It will be #1. if it's not already, honestly. I think you could make a good argument that it is already. But it's not going to do what America did. It's not going to just look like America 2. It's not going to provide freedom of the seas, as you see with the Houthis or the South China Sea claims. It's not going to create international institutions that are, treat small countries as if they're equal to big countries. It's not going to do that. It's not going to, it'll lend to countries in sort of the same way the IMF did, but it'll look different. It will, it will not necessarily jump in to protect countries from invasion like we did in like Kuwait or South Korea or some of these other cases, right? Or Ukraine, honestly, in a different way.
They were allied with Ukraine. That's sorry to cut you off, but like that's the interesting thing. Like China had a lot of economic ties with Ukraine. They had like a really good relationship with Ukraine, and then Russia invaded. And they just didn't care. Like they just sort of tacitly backed Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's reasons for that, but that was China. Basically, China would be a much better country if it just never imitated Russia and always imitated Japan. If China just like tried to be more Japanese and less Russian, they'd be better as a country. Yeah. The Chinese age will be fairly mediocre. It will be a more mediocre age, and that sometimes happens. Like if you look at the Islamic Golden Age, right? It was pretty cool. Cool stuff got invented. There was cool poetry. There was like the interesting like trade and exchange and culture, but it was poorer than the classical period. The Greco-Roman Han kind of period, whatever. Like the Middle Ages were well, I guess the Tang Dynasty was better in China, but in the West, the Islamic Golden Age was just less rich and provided less cultural flourishing, I guess, than the previous Golden Age had. And of course, then you had the Dark Ages where you had pseudo hegemonic powers who just kind of sucked. But then like the whole late Roman imperial period, like the whole 300s, 400s, 500s, those centuries, just like they were kind of sucky. Yes, you had powerful countries. Yes, you had the Byzantine Empire. You had whoever was in charge, right? Like there were powerful countries around, but it was a suckier time in the world. I think that the Chinese age will disappoint. China will disappoint as a hegemon. It will not be as cool as America was. It will not be as conducive to world, economic growth and stability and cultural flourishing and also technological flourishing. I think China is a somewhat pro-technology country. You see them doing they do lots of innovation. They like technology for some things, but then I think fundamentally, America always was never afraid to push the boundaries of technology, even though it threatened their, even though they knew it would threaten their social, order,
social fabric.
And in fact, that's what destroyed us, right? That's what brought us down was the social media. At least if you believe my thesis, we continually pushed technology until finally something we invented did bring us down. Like the car didn't bring us down, the microchip didn't bring us down, the computer and the early internet didn't bring us down, right? We kept inventing, the railroads didn't bring us down. We kept inventing these new things and they kept building us up instead of bringing us down. And then we invented the smartphone with Twitter on it. And that fucked us. That brought us down. And then we just kept rolling the dice until we did a critical failure. We rolled a 1 on the D20. And so we just, but China, I think, is much more wary. They're much more risk averse in this sense. They will fear the introduction of the next technology. Whatever beyond what they need to surpass America, they will be wary of innovation.
Yeah.
And I think that will produce a more static world.
Do you think, Noel, what's the best case scenario? Like best case scenario, somehow everyone holds on until the midterms, restrains Trump. Can it ever go back, do you think, to American leadership?
It can't. That's done. But I do think that internationally what you see is military technology shifting toward the defense. Ukraine, the small country, is able to defend against the entire might of Russia based on just like building a whole bunch of drones, and and so I think that China will be very hard to resist, and I don't think Taiwan can resist them. But Japan and Korea may be able to, just by porcupining with a whole ton of missiles and drones and stuff like that. They may be able to resist Chinese attack much more effectively than. I mean, Taiwan's just too small. The big guy will always overwhelm you, especially like India. I think will be able to like use asymmetric warfare against China. I think you're not gonna see a new age of conquest with the barbarians like sweeping across the plains and like taking whole territories and stuff like that. You're not gonna see like powerful countries crushing weaker ones as much as you did before. You still can, but it just takes more effort, more like Russia's throwing everything they have at Ukraine. They've turned their entire society into an arsenal. Like they're militarized and mobilized their entire society. They said, we're not going to fight a limited war. This is not a little imperialistic adventure where we just send in our professional army and hope they win. Okay, we're going to put everybody in a fucking munitions factory. We're going to reorient our entire society around this war. And Ukraine, which is a quarter the size of Russia, I think, or less, like Ukraine is holding them off. And with less and less American aid, America still gives them Patriots and Gimlers and stuff, but Ukrainian made drones are like doing most of the fighting now. And like Ukraine has a manpower problem, but they're still managing to hold off the Russians. And I think that even though Russia's throwing its entire everything into this war, it's taking like almost no territory. And I think that this is a good sign. It means that the world is more stable than it used to be. And I think we saw some harbingers of that for a long time with the way that guerrilla armies were able to sort of frustrate both the Americans and the Russians during the Cold War at times. But now we never saw either America or Russia throw its whole might into like attacking. Like if we had like mobilized our entire society to like conquer Vietnam, we could have just done it. Or just annihilated Vietnam. But now the fact that Russia's unable to obviously they could just nuke Ukraine, but but the fact that they're unable to conquer Ukraine even with maximum effort, that's new, right? Russia could have conquered Afghanistan with maximum effort. They lost 15,000 guys and quit.
I mean, I guess this comes back to your whole thing about like, Poland's going to go nuclear. All these different countries are going to go nuclear. There's going to be massive nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, and that's the best we can hope for now. It's basically porcupine is the new thing. Multipolar porcupine. That's got to be our hope now for liberalism in the world. And
this is so bitter. It's fucking sad. But that's where we are.
That is where we are.
Everybody just builds defense that the invasion is just not worth it. It's just there's just too much losses. We so far we haven't really mentioned Europe at all. Is Europe irrelevant at this point?
Europe's important.
What's the role if we look at the whole big picture, global geopolitics? What's the role of Europe right now? How do you see it?
Europe will be primarily occupied with defending against local threats. And the main local threat is Russia. Obviously, Russia's not going to stop with Ukraine. Russia's a Ponzi empire that attempts to conquer by enslaving. So Russia wants Ukraine not for the land, but for the people. It wants to enslave the Ukrainian people into becoming cannon fodder against Poland, after which it can enslave the Polish people as cannon fodder against the Germans. Right? That's the long-term Russian plan. That's why they abduct all the children. That's why they mass conscript everyone from the Donbass, et cetera, et cetera. You know this, just for the viewers. So that's their plan. And I think that the French and to some degree the British and Germans are starting to wake up to that fact. And that means that what you have to do against Russia is just contain them, just stop them, build a line, stop the Russians, and then the Russian internal dynamics will make them collapse because they're highly exploitative of all their internal losers. The Russia's it's like a Russian prison, right? Whoever has to be the cock of the prison will eventually fight back and rebel, or at least try to secede and run away. And so Russia is a Russian prison. And so then that will happen. And that's what happened. That's what happened in the Cold War. That's how we won the Cold War. We just did containment. And then eventually the Ukrainians and the Baltics and the Romanians and the Poles and all these people were like, fuck no, we're the cock, right? We don't want to be the cock. The cock is like it's the bitch. It's the guy who's on the bottom of the hierarchy of Russian prison rape and, torture. And so, but all the people at the bottom of Soviet society rebelled against the Russians and left. And then Soviet Union collapsed, Russia shrank, and then the Cold War was won. Simply draw another line. And yes, that line is you're not going to take back all of Ukraine. And you can say that you don't have to recognize Crimea and like the Donbass as part of Russia, but Russia's gonna control it. You won't be able to roll back Russia's armies. So there'll be like an armistice or something, right? It won't be like a peace treaty. They won't acknowledge the loss of territory. They'll just agree to stop fighting, and then the war will officially still continue. But then
Like
but the major
Korea.
combat will stop. Like Korea.
Yeah. What
And
do you
then
think
so that's
sorry,
what
so I know.
Korea is. There's no peace treaty in Korea.
Yeah.
And they still fight occasionally. They still shell across the border and sink each other's ships once in a while. So anyway, that will happen, and Europe will stand against Russia. That's Europe's main job right now, and it can do it. Europe has 3 times the population and 10 times the GDP and manufacturing capacity of Russia. They can easily stand up against Russia if they just unify and get their act together and their ass in gear, let's say. And Europe has this capability and it needs to do it. Protecting trade and beating the Houthis will be a long-term European challenge as well, but we don't have to talk about that. It's really just Europe's goal is to draw a line against Russia and hold that line forever until Russia collapses in however many decades.
Yeah.
That'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, Russian economy is basically, it's just built for war right now. The whole system, the education, everything. So you cannot keep up that forever. I mean, you probably know more about economy than me, but I mean, it's like they don't have the workers for the factories. They're basically their unemployment is very low right now, I think.
Right. And this happened once before, by the way. So this happened after World War I. Over the course of World War I, the Tsarist Russians built up their entire economy for war. They remade their entire economy around war production. Because World War I was this war of like ammunition production, right? It was the technology again in World War I was shifted toward the defense, and you just used machine guns and artillery to hold everybody away. That's how you did it, just like we are using drones now, and so and artillery, and so then Tsarist Russia reoriented its economy toward war, and when you had the communists take over, they built on that. Stalin's economy was built on the base created during World War I. And one of the reasons Stalinism sucked so bad, I'll say World War I, but also the Russian Civil War, where a lot of that production continued. One of the reasons Stalinism sucked so bad, I mean, there were many reasons, right? But one of the reasons Stalin's economy sucked so bad is because they attempted to just make everything a war. Right? They were doing war production for manufacturing, so they didn't care about efficiency in manufacturing. They didn't care about selling commercial products in manufacturing. They didn't care about any of that stuff because it was all war. So it's just produce more. So they just kept producing tanks, planes and stuff like that, as if they were going to go to war again, and then never did. But then if you looked at like Magnitogorsk project or whatever, it was all just like a war production kind of thing. And then so collectivization of agriculture was like the food war. Yeah. They treated it like a war economy, and it didn't work. You need commerce, you need selling things, you need efficiency, you need all those things. And then it took a while, but eventually it brought Russia down. Obviously, then oil happened, and then Russia was able to sell a bunch of oil, and that sort of prolonged the demise of the Soviet economy. But fundamentally, Stalin, doing all this stupid collectivization and running Russia right into the ground in the 20s and 30s, this was basically from war production, because he didn't know how to do anything except war production. I think we're going to see the same thing in Russia now after the end of the Ukraine war. Russia will try to rebuild its economy based on the model of war production, and I don't think it's going to work.
So no, of course, no. Thank you, Noah. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. Very, very depressing a bit, but I think it's unfortunately probably the most accurate picture of the world right now. Like, this is how I unfortunately see most of these things happening too. Thank you, Noah.
At least we can no longer say that we'd like to go back and live in the world of 30 years ago, because if we did, we'd kind of know what was coming.
Oh, man, I mean,
no more nostalgia. Now, yes, we have to live through a sort of a crash and a global setback. But that means that we get to imagine building a better future. Whereas if you were sitting there in 1999, you could only imagine the crash to come.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I guess that's the optimism. Like, at least we have something. Fukuyama said, like, if people don't have a good cause to fight for, they'll just fight out of boredom. At least we've got a good cause to fight for now.
That's a great line.
That's a great way to end it, I think. Thank you, Noah.
Exactly.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
guys.
you so much. This was a great talk. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you.